Hlekazi, thank you very much for taking time out to speak to us this afternoon. We know you have a very busy schedule.
No problem. Anything for you guys.
I want us to start from the very beginning, before we even get into what occupies your day as a recognizable business leader. Let's go back all the way to Etabase. Speak to us about those early days. What was it like growing up in the Nyati household? You mentioned in your book that your father always wanted you to be a doctor. He probably didn't get the doctor in Mteto. He probably got the doctor in one of your other siblings. But talk to us about how it was growing up in that milieu and in that house.
Look, it was a really vibrant household. There's like 10 of us, then 2 parents. So basically, we have a family of 12 people. That's a large family. And my parents were both teachers. And you can see just from that the focus on education is like top priority. But at the same time, my mother decided, in order for them to support this large family, she stepped out and decided to set up a shop. And it is that shop that I would say changed the lives, all of our lives. We grew up there. It shaped my life definitely when it comes to, because coming back from school, I used to be behind the counter, serving customers and supporting and helping my mother there. And that instilled a certain kind of discipline. So the discipline, and also I'll say the value of putting customers first. And watching her, how she treated those employees of hers is something that continues to inspire me even today. How she listened to them, how she gave them the space, they shaped how things were being done within that environment. And that's where I grew up in that environment, and quickly became very much interested in science. And I remember at the time when I was in grade 12, I represented South Africa in the International Science Youth Olympiad. And by the way, that's where I decided that medicine is clearly not my thing. Coming from the UK, having been exposed to all of the careers there, I knew coming that engineering has to be my thing. And I decided to do mechanical engineering. And I don't regret doing that.
In many ways, I guess, as a African university student in the early 1980s. In many ways, you were also part and parcel of that period. One, being a numerical minority on campuses, but also how that interfaced with the political environment. And many people would argue that you couldn't avoid being bitten by the political bug.
The fact that I could not go and study at Natal University, I had to go and apply to the Minister of Education to give me permission to go and attend Natal University. If you are not even politicized, that thing alone politicizes you. Why do I have to go through something like this? When everybody else they just have to come in. So that. But of course, the whole environment at the time. When I was at Natal University was 1985. At the heart of the movement, the political state of emergency, the number of people that were imprisoned, you just cannot help but be part of that movement. So I ended up being a member of ASASO, as an student organization, and together with a number of us, we ended up being part of the umbrella body called the United Democratic Front. And of course, I ended up also being an underground member of the African National Congress.
After your university studies, we understand that you get offered a Rhodes Scholarship. You turned that down. Speak to us about what informed that decision, and in hindsight, do you think you made the right decision?
Look, it was not anything big that I could say that, it's an offer that was made by the university, and that was great of them to offer me that, to go and do masters in Germany. But at the time, my mother was very sick, and being the firstborn, her firstborn myself, I felt that I needed to be close to her at that time. And I decided to turn down the scholarship, and I don't regret it. I probably would have ended up being an academic, going out and lecturing. I don't necessarily think that is where I wanted to be.
You don't think you would have enjoyed it?
I may have enjoyed it, but I think when I look at the impact as more for me, the impact is more in terms of the work that I'm doing now than if I were just confined to the academic institution.
A lot of us take for granted, especially the younger generation, professionals, we take it for granted when we go into corporate spaces and we have, I guess, people who look like us, who are role models, who are in positions of seniority. But one would think that when you went to Afrox or many of the other corporations you worked in, that probably wouldn't have been something that was the norm and would have been something of an exception.
Look, there were many people like me in all of these companies, but they were not at the levels where I entered the organization. Sure. There were much lower levels in the organization. So coming into management, there was nobody like me. In fact, I remember one of my mentors at the time said, you are one of the, in fact, you are the first one. You are like an experiment. And if you mess up, you'll be messing up for all of the other black guys coming after you, So you just have that weight on your shoulders you are carrying. But I felt, I'm somebody who always likes challenges. I felt, I can take this challenge. But I must say that I was helped a lot by some of the people that I found there. It was an environment that was not inclusive, it was not diverse, as I've already mentioned. But one of the guys called Neil Greenfield, who invited me, he said, can you come and be part of my team? He was forming up this team that was going to do some excellent work. He showed me what inclusion means. In an environment where nobody really wants to be associated with you. Sure. Here we've got somebody who's reaching out and saying, can you be part of my team? Even today, when I think about diversity and inclusion, I think about how that small, I think in fact was not true, that act made me to feel like I belong, and how if we do that in the environments where we work, we'll be impacting positively so many people that today feel like they are not being included.
Yeah. Do you see that as, I guess, a stepping stone in many ways that catapulted you to feeling very comfortable, feeling very emboldened in your other roles, and many of your later roles, be it at Microsoft, at MTN, and maybe now at Altron?
See, the work that I did at Afrox, the work that I did there was a leading edge work. It was like we're thinking about quality management. If you remember at the time, it was in the US, the automotive industry was almost dying because they were being attacked, the competitors from Japan, Toyotas and Nissans, and we decided to implement the Japanese techniques at that time here in Afrox. So you had to read seriously about the work that they were doing there to make their companies globally competitive. So that to me is the work that I think you ended up always being ahead of the rest of everybody because of the type of work that we're doing there. And later on, I did similar kind of work at NAMPEC, where we're looking at world-class manufacturing. How do you make your operations to be globally world-class? And again, there you're looking at the Japanese companies, you're looking at what the Chinese companies were doing, and the US companies, benchmarking yourself. That work also made me to be in a position where I'm ahead of my peers in terms of just the thinking, And that I can tell you, those two projects helped me to, they set me,
In many ways, I guess, your journey in the world of corporate South Africa also coincided with a lot of socio-political shifts that were happening in the country. Just talk to me about what impact on the kind of competitiveness that you speak about, the kind of operational approach every single day in many of the entities that you worked in. How much of what was happening outside of the firm or outside of the boardroom was influencing what was happening inside?
A lot, yeah. It was a lot. Here you are being tasked with the responsibility to improve productivity. So you'll be thinking about techniques to help to bring the teams to work together as teams. That requires the workers to be empowered. You are giving them something that in that setting, usually they are not even supposed to think. And here you are
even say
coming,
anything,
here you are coming up with ideas to say, no, these people have got brains. These people are the closest to the problem. Let us give them the space to come up with solutions that tackle this problem. That is something that was difficult. So that's one. On the other hand, we've got unions who feel this person is having these discussions with my members and giving them some ideas that clearly are not in line with my ideas. So we are caught in this space, and you had to be really systematic, be able to connect and try to show the union why it is in their interest to allow their members to be part of this journey. At the same time, tackle and address management to give these guys the space to be able to contribute to the improvement of very, very, very tricky situation. But if you do that, you are able to do that successfully, it helps you, because largely in life it's all about managing interests and finding those common areas to be able to pull people together, so that they can work towards one common objective.
It's interesting that you mentioned this, because we tend to talk a lot about social compacts, and some of the nations that you mentioned are often the lodestars that all of us who want a developmental state often look towards. We say South Korea is a perfect example. We say, the Taiwanese model is a perfect example. And all of those things pre-assume a functional paradigm of engagement between business, government and labor. What do you think on either side has accounted for us moving backwards in the manner that we have?
Look, in a positive way, we moved into 1994. We ended up with the new labor laws, and that was positive. But I would like to say that that is also, it was a step. It was moving us backwards, because here you have this environment which is so inflexible. In fact, it was designed largely based on the European labor system, which is so inflexible. And yes, it's giving all of these powers to the workers, but at the same time, what it's not doing is when you look at it, people are afraid to employ people, because if they are inside the system, they now have to be governed by these laws, and it's going to be difficult for the companies to be flexible. So that, in my mind, have moved us a little bit backwards. It was a gain that ended up having a negative consequence. Yeah. So what we need to do is to go back to that and say, everybody must be prepared to lose something.
Sure.
We cannot always be gaining. Yes, I'm part of this thing, and I'm walking in there knowing that I have to give up something. That's the problem. Right now, nobody is prepared to give up. As business, we must be prepared to give up something. The same thing with workers, the same thing with government. That is the mentality, because we're doing this thing to save South Africa, to grow our country. That is what it should be important, national agenda.
We often talk about the era that we're in now. I mean, if you spoke to an entity in the 20th century, many of those businesses were heavily reliant on things like fuel and maybe steel as a major input to their operations in that era of manufacturing. I think if you look now, we're probably more reliant on digital platforms, people, and of course the use of insights that are drawn from data. In a country like South Africa, that surely has an opportunity, but also a risk on the downside. And the big risk is that you might widen inequality even further, because we haven't invested enough in the human capability in the basic education system to get everybody up to speed. What do you think is the massive opportunity on the upside?
Like any industrial revolution, there's always a positive and a negative. If we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, in our country, we tend to be so focused on the negative side. But you look back over the last three revolutions, each and every one of those revolutions have actually created more jobs, more opportunities. And this is going to be no different. I'll make an example, one or two examples. Today, there is a platform. It's a digital platform that helps people that are the domestic workers to be matched with people that are looking for those kind of skills. And these domestic workers, they do not have to be struggling. They can sign up into this platform and they will quickly get, they'll be assigned.
And do multiple jobs.
Yeah. Here is a low-level skill that in the past would struggle. But because now we've got technology, these people will be able to bid their services in this platform and try and get themselves into jobs that are high-paying. So here is a technology that is helping us to address low-skill jobs. That's one. The other one, look at the Uber, what it has done. How many jobs low-level jobs have been created by that digital platform? So thinking about this thing, think about all of these people you continue to see carrying balls saying that I want to be a painter, I want to be this and a plumber, this. If we were to create platforms that helps them to match them. So let us not just be looking on the negative side. There is such a positive. We need to be using digital technology to help us address our real problems, which is how do you engage those level skills, give them opportunities. And we have many examples to do that. And we've got many smart people in our country that can come up with other ideas on how to leverage.
Let's talk briefly about the entity that you lead now, with Altron. From its roots, I think it was around since 1947. From those early roots, as a family business.
No, let me correct you. It was 1965.
1965.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, which is about what now? Say 54 years? Initially as a family business, but now really, I guess, a company of global import. And I want us to talk about how that entity has morphed from really early stage technology, because it did coincide with some of the early drivers in technology, to now an entity playing in the AI space, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and many other spaces.
Now, this company started largely at the back of the contract that they had with Telkom.
Yes.
The founder himself used to work for Telkom. In fact, he was given a bursary by Telkom. So got the training, he got out of there, he got an opportunity, he supplied Telkom with some of the services and products, and he grew out from there. If you go fast forward in the 80s, this is the company that stepped forward when the international sanctions were placed on South Africa, and it attracted people who were, I would say, defiant. South Africans who felt that, if these global companies, they can decide to leave South Africa, we are going to come up with our own technology that's going to substitute these products and services of multinational companies. Depending on which side of the political spectrum you were sitting at the time, you would label this company, But that is not the point of my discussion today. My point is that you've got here at the heart of this company people that are so patriotic, people that make things happen, coming up with technologies that make a difference. For example, the digital decoder, it was built here, a decoder, those kind of technologies. The stolen vehicle recovery, like in Netstar,
Yes.
that technology came from this company, and it's up to today is one of the leading technologies that we have globally, and those are the kind of people that we have here. So then you fast forward now into the 2010s, 2015, and it went through a really tough time because some of the operations that were built during the time of international sanctions, those were operations that used to have maybe one or two customers. I am building to make sure that Eskom have cables. I am building such that we continue to have transformers for Eskom. Now all of a sudden, the sanctions have been lifted, and these companies can now buy these operations from elsewhere. And the whole design, the need for, for this kind of company or the operations no longer exist. It did not make business sense because you only got one customer.
Sure.
How can you compete with the global players? So we needed to take that point to say we need to cut these companies because they are no longer relevant. Set ourselves for the new world. And that's where I come in. I came in that environment, at that time where we had to make these tough calls. We sold a number of these companies. I'll take UEC, the transformer business of Altron, we sold those, whilst we at the same time
We're acquiring other businesses.
we were acquiring, and we pivoted the company to focus on the new, talking about cloud computing and etc. So that is where we are now. That job is not yet done. We've acquired a few companies here in South Africa. Carabina is one of them. Acquired a company in Australia, in the UK, all of them in these areas, but we have to continue to build and make sure that we're able to provide end-to-end ICT capabilities in South Africa.
I know I've posed this question to you before on a different platform, which is, how much of the work of educating your customer do you have to do? Because I would think that on the one hand, you might have a customer who's been with you for the last 2 decades or so, who has to undertake their own digital transformation in terms of their offering. How much hand-holding do you need to do with some of those customers to say, look, here's a new sensor which might allow you to play in a different space. It might give you cost and quality advantages that you might not have had before.
Because of the internet, we are finding that our buyers have become so sophisticated. But as a company, we always need to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of them. So we have invested here in Altron with what we call industry experts, people that do not just understand a specific technology, but also understand specific industries. So a combination of those 2 is something that is unique. You'll find that people have a great understanding of a specific technology, but how does it talk to mining? How does it talk to financial services?
So the business case, yeah.
Yes. So that is what we have done, and that combination is helping us to be able to go and sit with a CEO of a specific, let's say, of a financial services company, and help him and think, or she must think through, in this new world of this new digital world, how does the bank of the future look like? We need to help, and that is what the hand-holding we're talking about. But at the same time, it's not just going to be about that. We have to show some of that, demonstrate it. So it's a combination of having this great discussion at a thought leadership level, but also having platforms and where we are able to show what we're talking about. So we've invested heavily in those, what we call customer centers, where we're demonstrating the technologies.
You spoke about a pivot earlier on.
Yeah.
I'm quite interested from a capital structure perspective. What does that kind of pivot mean? You're speaking about investing in a customer-centric service model. One would think that requires a lot of money. What has that pivot meant for the balance sheet of Altron?
Look, it has meant that in the past, we were actually a capital-intensive company, having to invest in these manufacturing plants, a lot of money. And linked to that, you also have to go and buy raw materials. And so it was a very capital-heavy company. Right now, we are a capital-light company. Our real resource is people. Sure. And that's where we have to focus. We're focusing largely on them. And if you look at it now, we're sitting with a company that has reduced its debt from a high of about 4.5, 5 billion. We're sitting at about 1 billion. And if we continue the way we have been performing as a company, and if we do not make acquisitions, we may end up in a situation where we don't have debt. And that's the kind of company that we have now, a cash generative company.
Very agile, yeah.
Very agile, people centered. So if you look, the way we are managing it, we have put people at the center. Values are so important, and we've been rolling out those values because what we want to do, we want to create an organization where we're creating a great place to work so that we can attract the best talent. Because the thing that is going to differentiate us in the future in this space is not the factories.
Sure.
It's the quality of the people that we have in our company. And that is the key. Our people are the top priority.
Talking about those people, just paint a picture for us of how some of these global partnerships fit into play. I mean, you used to work at Microsoft, and we know that over the last 5 years or so, the biggest advance has been this idea of software as a service rather than something that you buy off the shelf, pay for once, and you can use until the next one comes up. How have those partnerships shaped up?
Yeah. Look, you've got companies like Amazon, companies like Microsoft, Oracle. These companies, they are global players and they are leading when it comes to cloud services globally. You then have to, you're sitting here, you need to ask yourself, how can I be part of their ecosystem so that when they grow, I can also grow? Some people have made some very, I would say, poor decisions by choosing to compete with these companies. We have chosen to look for opportunities to partner with them. And you do that by understanding what is it that they are missing. They may have the large data centers, they come and invest here, but they do not have the people in the country to help companies to move from their premise to cloud centers, you know? So that is where we are positioning ourselves as a company. And without us, those investments made by these companies will not yield any returns because you still need someone to handhold that client, help them to understand how to move to the cloud and shift those workloads to the cloud. And that work is done by local companies like us.
I want us to briefly talk about policy and two related aspects of it. I think the first one is around some of the data centers that you mentioned. And in a context where the harvesting and even the monetization of data points or insights emerging from data has become such a big thing. Do you feel that we've mounted an effective response from a policy perspective to this idea of data sovereignty and being able to manage that? Because somebody's making money out of the data. The big question is, are we getting our fair share as a country?
Look, there is, we should always guard against coming out with policies that stifle innovation. You know, in trying to protect, so-called protect the country, you can actually chase away investment. There are things like called GDPR that has been adopted in the UK, in Europe, in EU. We need standards like that. Adopt those standards. More so here in Africa, you know, we've just signed now the Africa Free Trade Agreement.
Continental Free Trade Area.
Free Trade Agreement. But the issue with that is that each and every country has got different policies around data.
And regulatory frameworks.
Yes. So what that then end up asking of companies like, let's say, the Standard Bank, or all of these companies that are operating elsewhere, each country is asking them to set up a data center in their own country. That adds cost. It goes completely against the whole idea of cloud computing.
Probably not the most efficient thing to do.
It is not. It is not. So if we do not sort out these standards things, we are not going to benefit out of these things. So in my mind, let us not try and reinvent the wheel.
Sure.
Let's learn what they have done elsewhere. Take that, modify it to suit our environment and implement that. And that provides the policy certainty that companies like ours and companies like Microsoft, the global players, need for them to invest on our continent. Then let's also look in terms of the privacy laws. You know? Because what we are talking about is around the privacy, how people are using personal data to gain. You know, let's strengthen and tighten that. You know?
Sure.
And once we've got that, leave the entrepreneurs. Don't mess up. Allow them to come up with their own things and free the space. And we'll be amazed at what our local people are able to come up with. You know? We tend to want to, you know, spoon feed, trying to do all of these things and in the process of doing that, we're stifling innovation.
A lot of unintended consequences that end up emerging. On the issue of the release of high demand spectrum, some of the views that you would hold as somebody who's worked at a Microsoft, at an MTN, many businesses whose future business cases are going to be heavily reliant on our ability to not only license but quickly deploy some of this high demand spectrum. We've got fifth generation networks coming online soon. There might be other things down the pike as well. We've failed to move with the necessary speed. We've even missed the ITU deadline. What do you make of what the sixth administration is doing in that
In
regard?
all honesty, it's so sad for our country to be where we are now, where we are, in fact, the laggard when it comes to this space in terms of Africa. That is sad. A country like ours so advanced. Why? Largely because of selfish interests, people trying to capture opportunities for themselves, when in reality, the whole nation is paying the price of high communication costs. Think about, some of our parents sitting somewhere in the rural areas having this limited amount of money that they have, and they're using most of that in communication today. If we were to free that up, what it will do in terms of changing their lives, and yet we're still focusing on this, political self-interest that we're driving. So put that aside. The sixth administration has been very clear that they want to address this. We need to move away from just wanting to doing. We need to get to that doing part. The good thing is ICASA has already come up with a memorandum that is helping to define how this allocation will look like. That's a good thing. What I would like to see, though, is that instead of just doing the 4G, let us already in one go for the fifth generation, because we have lost so much time in the 4G space, and the opportunity cost of that for our country has been huge. We cannot afford to have the same thing again, when it comes to 5G.
Geopolitically, what do you make of some of the debates? Many people are suggesting that even the impasse between Beijing and Washington has a lot to do with who's ahead when it comes to the fifth generation technology in particular. And you think about the role of a Huawei in the middle of that. Well, what is your view about the role that this kind of infrastructure and network infrastructure is going to play in some of the geopolitical tensions of the future?
Look, if you look, in my mind, the whole thing around the China and US is linked directly to the fact that Huawei is way ahead when it comes to 5G. But that's just my view. What we need to be doing, though, as a country, we need to carve out the space for ourselves. Sure. And that I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing us defining where do we want to play. Where everybody is talking fourth industrial revolution, but what does that mean for the country? Let's unpack it. And what kind of skills we need to already be building in order to grab this opportunity that is in front of us. Where I see the opportunity is in the local environment. What do I mean by that? These global players like Microsoft, like Google, they can come up with things that talk to the global needs. But they can never know what the people of Soweto and the people of Khayelitsha and the people of Pretoria or Tshwane are looking for. The advantage of us being here is that we understand, have a deep insight about the local environments. We can now partner with them, the global players. Sure. They are global, but they need local insights and local solutions. We have that ability because we are living in these environments. The partnership between those two is what I see happening going forward. And that's where we should be guiding our local, in particular people who are developers, in the technology space. Think about the local problems and how we can address those local problems. And through that, you can be able to escape through the global players like the Microsoft.
We've certainly had a long-standing debate in South Africa on the relationship between wage growth and productivity. And I want to return to this theme of productivity and the management of the different interests that determine whether or not a workplace is a productive one and incrementally over time is able to become competitive. How do you think that debate has morphed or evolved in South Africa from the 90s, which I would think was a bit more fractious as an industrial environment, to what is happening now?
Look, I think in my mind, things have moved backwards. There was a point in time, I remember clearly when I was in NAMPEC, our union was NUMSA, and we had such good understanding between management and NUMSA. We said we need to do things that help all of us, to achieve our objectives. We put aside the politics and looked at the interest of the corporate and interest of the workers and aligning those. When I look at where we are now, look at just the current situation at SAA, there is nothing. People are poles apart. There's so much politics. Look at the companies or the countries where things have moved forward. You'll find that the key stakeholders, they're working, they are aligned. You'll find that the unions, you find the companies and also government, they come together. That's what they did in Japan. That's what they're doing in Korea. That's what they're doing elsewhere. We need to have that one agenda for the country. Here, we are nowhere close to that. And that's worrying, because in the 80s, we were getting there. And right now, we've actually moved backwards. And the things, what is said, you may find that we will probably lose SAA, right? With all of those jobs being lost. Why? Because people were not talking to each other. People were not looking at what's the best for everybody, not just their, group interest. And that is worrying.
What does a normal day look like for you as the CEO of Altron, and even just as a parent, as a husband? What does that day look like?
And normally I leave at 6 o'clock. Okay. I go home, and make sure that I have dinner with my family. But my day starts very early. I'm a morning person. Okay. I usually like to have my meetings with customers or with partners, breakfast meetings. So usually starts like that. I arrive here at the office usually after those meetings at 9:30, and then I start my day. If not, I arrive here at the office about 7:15, and before everybody else comes, I'm tackling mail, making sure that I catch up with mail. And of course, I send a few emails irritating a few of my colleagues. Yeah, so that's that. But I look at what are some of my key stakeholders, and it's very important, our employees, key stakeholders. So I don't just sit here at head office. I go and visit operations. We've got this thing called town hall meetings. We update the employees about where we are in the company and give them the opportunity to ask us questions. So I spend time with them. I spend time with government. We cannot just wait. We need to shape the thinking. I'm part of the organization called PPGI, Public-Private Growth Initiative, and I'm actually leading the ICT sector there. And what is it that we're doing there? Trying to come up with that, understanding between government and public sector. What is it that we can do together to grow our sector?
So you're building the master plans there?
I'm building that master plan for that, for our sector. And I think there are 19 sectors already that have got something, and we are one of those 19. Spend time with the investor community. Always want to understand where we're going. Sure. So that's that. And and of course, spend time with, sometimes, the society when we're donating here something or engaging with that.
Sure. Sure. So, okay, Mr. Nyati, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it, and I don't want to take any more time from your family and from your wife in particular, but thank you very much for taking time out to speak to us.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.